اوکی سوال یک رو شروع کنم آقای ملک.
بله 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 سوال.
Okay, let's get started. You've been studying meditation for 30 years. In many countries, including Iran, it's been prevalent meditation, and people who are tired of all the stress and all the anxieties of the complex life of today welcome anyone who claims to be teaching meditation. Could it be possible that all of these teachings from different people and different sources fit into the scientific framework of meditation? In other words, when we talk about meditation, what are we talking about?
Yeah, happy to answer that. And can you please mute between questions so that, because the background is very loud. Very good, thank you. I appreciate that. So thank you for the question, and thank you for this opportunity to speak to the people in Iran. Meditation is a family of practices that are part of virtually every religious and spiritual tradition, and have only been recently investigated by modern science. The scientific research shows that there are likely some commonalities across the different kinds of meditation. One commonality is that meditation seems to have impact on our capacity to regulate our attention, our awareness. Secondly, most forms of meditation have some impact on our capacity to regulate our emotions. And so these are questions that have now become tractable within a scientific framework, and I think provide an important set of findings that appeal to some people and are helpful in motivating some people to take these practices more seriously. That's something we certainly hope will be a consequence of our scientific research.
سوال دوم بپرس. سوال دوم بپرس.
Between different versions, different kinds of meditation, the one that's been more prevalent has been the mindfulness kind. Among the hundreds different types of meditation, why is this one has been welcomed more by different people?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question concerning why mindfulness has been privileged, if you will, in the scientific research, particularly in the West. And my view is that it is really in part a historical accident, because mindfulness was the practice that was really introduced first from Asian contemplative traditions into the West, and that was something that catalyzed scientific research around it. The other thing about mindfulness is that it is a relatively well-characterized practice. It is the mechanics, if you will, of mindfulness meditation are very well described. There are standardized methods to teach mindfulness. And so when a scientist engages in scientific research, it's important that on a topic like mindfulness, it's important that the scientists have access to practitioners who've all been taught in a standardized way. And it's quite possible to find many mindfulness practitioners who've been trained in a very similar way, which it makes it more amenable to scientific research. And finally, the third element of this that I think is important is that mindfulness does not involve any appeal to a higher power, to God, to anything that would really be outside of the scientific worldview. And so because of that, it also was very appealing to scientists. I think that scientists would have a much more challenging time with a form of meditation from a theistic religious tradition because of the values that are important in science.
Thanks. سوال چهارم بپرس استیون هیز.
We had an interview 2 years ago with Dr. Stephen Hayes, and he was critical of kind of mindfulness without any values, and believed that mindfulness shouldn't be as it happened today, a target and the goal in and of itself. He even pointed out to the idea of breathing techniques in mindfulness exercises, and he said that this kind of breathing could increase anxiety. And not only that, it could, because of like hypocapnia, it could even be dangerous. Do you agree with these criticisms? Of course, you have also said that it's possible for mindfulness to strengthen features that might not be that healthy and that moral as well. But what would you say about these criticisms?
Yeah, I mean, I think that that Steve Hayes's fundamental criticism of mindfulness being removed from its ethical context is very important, and I would largely agree with him. I think that there is something very important about the ethical framework in which mindfulness was originally embedded, and I think that in the widespread dissemination of mindfulness in the West, this is something that has been lost to a large extent and is problematic and may well compromise the kind of outcomes that we aspire to occur with mindfulness training. So, I think this is very important. In terms of the specific breathing criticism, I mean, most forms of mindfulness meditation do not involve any explicit manipulation of the breath. And so I'm not sure what Steve was referring to there. But mindfulness often involves awareness of the breath, but not manipulation of the breath. And I would say that in terms of awareness of the breath, there really aren't any serious negative effects that have been reported. We have studied that ourselves, and classical forms that are taught today of mindfulness meditation are not associated with any significant harm. When breath is manipulated explicitly, that's a different issue, but that's not traditionally part of the teaching of mindfulness meditation.
سوال سوم بپرس.
You have compared mindfulness with exercise in your writings. What do you mean by that comparison?
Well, this is a question that is referring to a really important, I think, insight. And it is an insight that we have derived from modern neuroscience. And one of the important insights here is that there are two fundamentally different kinds of learning that have been characterized by modern neuroscience. One form of learning we call declarative learning, which is learning about something. So we can learn about the value of mindfulness. We can learn why it might be important, but of course, this would not necessarily make a person more mindful. The second kind of learning we call procedural learning. Procedural learning is embodied and it is acquired through practice, and it's more skill-based. In order to learn mindfulness, it's really necessary that one have both forms of learning. The declarative learning, which is the more conceptual learning, gives a person the view, the perspective, the kind of understanding, and the procedural learning gives them the actual skill of mindfulness. And this is why we liken it to physical exercise, because physical exercise is largely procedural. You can't strengthen your muscles by sitting in a class and learning about it. You've got to actually practice. And mindfulness is the same way. If you're going to learn the skills of mindfulness, you can't just sit in a classroom and listen to a lecture or read a book. You actually have to practice. And so in this sense, physical exercise is a really, I think, apt analogy. The other thing is that physical exercise is something that we intuitively know can strengthen our muscles through a regular practice. And in the same way, meditation can strengthen our mental muscles through repeated practice. And so we often use this analogy, and we think it's something that will help people to better understand the nature of practice and why it's important for practice to be regular.
Thanks. سوال پنجم بپرس دلای لما.
You've mentioned somewhere that the meeting that you had with Dalai Lama in 1992 was very essential and very important, impactful in your life. What kind of effect and what kind of transformation did that meeting had in your study, in the path of your studies and your scientific work?
Well, I'm trained as a neuroscientist, and in the early part of my career, I was focused quite a bit on understanding the brain mechanisms that were associated with why some people were more vulnerable to stress and anxiety and depression. When I first met the Dalai Lama in 1992, he asked me a very innocent question, and he said, why can't I use the same tools of modern neuroscience that I was using to study anxiety and depression and stress, and apply those tools to the study of kindness and to the study of compassion, which of course are so central to his spiritual tradition. And I didn't have a very good answer for him, other than that it's hard. But, you know, when we first began to study anxiety and stress, that was hard. And I think most scientists would agree that we've made quite a bit of progress in our understanding of that. And so this was the beginning of a wake-up call for me that we can apply the same methods and the same strategies of rigorous science and begin to study the qualities that are cultivated by the meditative traditions and begin to study the impact of meditation itself on these qualities without compromising our scientific rigor.
Thanks. همون سوال 6 رو بپرس که قولی که داده شده.
شفقت و compassion بگم آقای ملک.
Compassion.
You said you promised Dalai Lama that you would put compassion in a scientific framework. It's been 30 years since that meeting. Have you made good on that promise?
Well, that's for others to judge, not for me. But I would say that I think that there has been a dramatic shift in our scientific understanding of compassion. If you go back to the early 1990s, when I first met the Dalai Lama, and look in a textbook of neuroscience or psychology from the West, you wouldn't find the word compassion mentioned at all. And today, you would find no book without the word compassion referenced in the index. And so I think there's been a dramatic change in at least scientific interest. And I would say we've made quite a bit of headway in our scientific understanding of compassion. We've identified circuits in the brain that distinguish between compassion and a near neighbor empathy. This insight has been extremely important. We have shown how the brain changes with simple forms of compassion training. We've identified how these circuits in the brain, when they change, predict increases in pro-social behavior. We've shown how certain kinds of in-group and out-group biases using hard-nosed behavioral measures are shifted by compassion training. And we've also shown how our peripheral biological systems that are important for our health are changed by compassion. So I would say there's been a lot of progress.
Thanks. سوال هفتم رو بپرس، مطالعات عصب شناسی.
In your neurological studies about the effects of meditation on the brain, you have found a lot of positive functions. Can you, in a summary, tell us what are the main functions of meditation in the brain, and what parts of the brain get involved in this activity?
Yeah, again, this is a hard question to answer in this general way, but I'll try. The reason it's hard, of course, is because there are many different kinds of meditation practices, and they're not all the same. They produce different effects in the brain. But there are a few things that we can say that are generalizable. The first is that virtually all forms of meditation strengthen the executive network in the brain that plays a role in self-control, self-regulation, and particularly the self-regulation of attention. Those networks importantly involve the prefrontal cortex, and there are now hundreds of scientific studies showing an impact on the prefrontal cortex. So that's one really important element. A second element is we know that there is a mode of brain function called the default mode. This can be measured with functional MRI, and it involves phenomenologically a lot of self-referential thought. So if a person is simply put in an MRI scanner and asked to simply rest, what do they do when they rest? Well, most people begin to think about themselves, think about their to-do list. All of what they think about essentially revolves in one way or another about themselves. And most people often get lost in this self-referential thought. And one of the key things that meditation does is it changes our relationship to the default mode. It doesn't eliminate the default mode, but it changes the extent to which the default mode, if you will, hijacks or modulates other networks in the brain. And so the way this is expressed is in measures of brain connectivity. And so the relationship between the default mode and other modes of the brain are altered through meditation. So these are some of the ways in which meditation produces effects on the brain.
اون بحث اهداف تحقیقاتی و اینکه تغییر ساختار چیز شخصیت.
One of the goals of your studies recently has been examining the effects of meditation on the expression of people's genes. And since one of the most important populations, one of the most important groups of your study, one of the most important demographics are children, are you trying to use meditation to change the personality structure of people? For example, is it possible to genetically make someone who's an extrovert, an introvert with meditation?
Those are, interesting ways of asking this question. Let me back up and say that one of the great insights from modern biology is the science of epigenetics. Epigenetics is the study of how our genes are regulated. So every person has a sequence of base pairs which constitute our DNA. And for the most part, that's not going to change in our lifetime. But what will change is the extent to which any gene is turned on or turned off. We can think of genes having little volume controls that go from low to high. And we know that experience, that our demeanor, that our social interactions can alter the extent to which a gene is turned on or turned off. And this is what epigenetics, at least in part, has studied. And so we have asked the question whether meditation can alter epigenetics and alter gene expression. And we have done several studies along these lines, and we were among the first groups to demonstrate that meditation can indeed alter our gene expression. Now, having said this, we don't do experiments to use meditation to explicitly alter our genes. We look at the alteration of our genes as an interesting and important byproduct of meditation. And so to the extent that meditation increases our prosocial behavior, helps to make us calmer and more compassionate and wiser people, we can begin to study how the alteration in our genes is related to those behavioral changes. And that can provide some really important insights into the underlying molecular genetics that are associated with those important characteristics of our mind. So that is something that we and other scientists are beginning to study. The likelihood of taking someone who is at the extreme of one distribution, say is an extreme extrovert, and converting them to an extreme introvert through meditation is very unlikely. And it's important that viewers not think of meditation as a cure-all. it is not going to cure all diseases. It will not change our genetic structure, so to speak, our genotype. It can influence our gene expression, and through that influence certain behavioral characteristics. The extent to which it can do that is something that current scientific research is examining.
سوال 9 رو بپرس که کارکردهای مثبت مدیتیشن تفاوت‌هاش.
Is it possible that the positive functions of meditation be dependent on culture or on a specific kind of person? For example, a culture or a person that has more emphasis on calmness and silence might get more benefit from meditation compared to another culture or another person who is more involved with crowds and groups of people and being involved in different kinds of things. Is it possible that that can have an effect on that?
Yeah, I think in general, cultural influences are extremely important, and they need to be taken into account. And so there are clearly certain cultural factors that are conducive to meditation, other cultural factors that might not be conducive. And so all of these are, very important issues, and would be very helpful in taking into account in a more systematic way. Most scientific research on meditation has not seriously considered these cultural factors, but it is something that I think needs to be studied more explicitly.
Thanks. اون بحث رواقیگری و اینکه انتقاداتی که از روانشناسی مثبت از رویکردهای مثبت به درمان میشه رو سوال کن.
Some of the people who criticize positive approaches like ACT and compassion therapy and the like, they think advocates of these kinds of therapists are inside the framework of Stoicism, and they accuse them of supporting capitalism, and they claim that these kinds of approaches in psychology are supported by capitalists and basically the upper class to control the negative emotions of the lower class communities. And so instead of them protesting and trying to have to create social change, they would just be busy calming their own negative emotions. What would be your answer for these kinds of criticisms that are increasing day by day from different sources?
Yeah, I think that some of that criticism is probably warranted. I think that that in the West, a lot of effort in disseminating meditation strategies is really focused more on middle class and upper middle class individuals, and it is these methods are not equitably available. They're not available to certain communities that may, in fact, really be especially suffering. Lower income communities, marginalized communities, and so forth. I certainly don't believe that they're not appropriate for those communities. I simply think that we have not done a very good job in the West of working with those communities and learning from those communities about what they may need the most. In our own work, we have tried to really go out of our way, so to speak, to reach those communities. We're doing work in very impoverished areas of Mexico with people who are in extreme poverty. We've worked with very severely abused, marginalized, low-income children, teenagers in Colombia, South America. So we have several research projects going on now with people from marginalized communities, from lower income communities, where we believe these methods can really be enormously helpful. We also know that the way these methods are brought to these communities needs to involve the community members themselves. And we need to co-create these programs using a kind of community engaged research strategy that that doesn't further marginalize these sectors, but rather centers them as key collaborators in helping to design strategies that are most effective for these communities. So the bottom line is that I think this kind of criticism is an important one, and I think that we need to do a much better job of making these methods much more widely available.
Thanks. سوال
آقای ملک، من روی این سوالی تبصره‌ای بزنم چون شما توضیح داد که ما چیکار کنیم که اینا بیشتر درد فقرا بخوره. من بگم که اصلا رو اصلش نقد داره. But one part of the criticism isn't necessarily about the availability and applicability of these methods to lower class. It's precisely that these methods being suggested to lower class isn't beneficial to them, because they shouldn't be trying to just calm themselves. They should be like, if I may exaggerate, they should be in the streets trying to change the situation so that they wouldn't have these stresses, because the stresses doesn't come from inside. It comes from them being deprived of opportunities, of statuses of success in life. And so some people say that these concepts aren't to help them, it's just to keep them silent so that the rich and the powerful could go on getting away with everything. What would you say to that kind of criticism?
I think it's a false way of framing the problem. And the reason is because I don't think it's either or. I think it's both. I think these people both need to be in the streets and they need these methods to help them at the same time. Because many of them are not in the streets. And the reason they're not in the streets is because they're overwhelmed. They don't have a sense of vitality. They can't imagine a future life that is better. They are hopeless. And it's just for those reasons that we need both. And so I think the very framing of the question that you asked is fundamentally wrong. And it needs to be both.
It's a very good answer. Thank you.
سوال 11 رو که سوال 11 رو
Continuing on that idea, in recent years, especially between the youth, feeling good and having a good mood has become a kind of a value. And so anything that can create this kind of a good mood, even for a few hours, is considered allowed, even if it's using drugs and psychedelic drugs. And some parents and families are very worried about this. Is the emphasis on meditation with the same kind of approach to create that good mood, and but with this prevalence, because the same groups of youth who are looking around for a good mood, for feeling good, are going after it? Is their approach similar and related?
No, it's fundamentally different. And I think it comes from a a confused understanding of meditation. Meditation has nothing to do with making people happy all the time. That is a false characterization. It's one of the reasons why we use the term well-being and flourishing. A person who is flourishing is not necessarily happy all the time. If something tragic occurs, it would be appropriate to be sad. In fact, if you're not sad, then there's something fundamentally wrong. And so the goal, so to speak, is not for people to be happy. The goal is for people to be aware and to be wise and to be kind-hearted, but that doesn't mean they're happy all the time. So I think it's just a false understanding of meditation. And we, in fact, have documented that, particularly in the early stages, meditation can make you more anxious and doesn't necessarily produce more happiness. And that's good. That's a sign of progress. So it's not about being happy.
ولی بگو که بسیاری از کسانی که تو ایران استفاده میکنن دقیقاً با این روی کرد به سراغ مدیتیشن میرن.
The thing is, a lot of people who go for meditation in Iran, for learning it, for teaching it, for using it, for advertising it, they go for it with this idea that it's about feeling good, that it's gonna help you feel good. That's the prevalent idea in the Iranian society about this.
Well, I think that it seems to me first that there's a rich tradition in the a rich contemplative tradition in the Islamic religion that would I think be important for the Iranian population to appreciate. I'm certainly not an expert in that, but I think that there are insights from that tradition that speak to the wisdom of these practices, not so much the fact that they are that they're there to make you happy. There is a there's a fundamental difference between a sense of being okay, that is fundamentally being knowing that having a sense of security, if you will, in your own skin. And it's not about being happy, but it is about being okay. It is about having emotions, if you will, that are context appropriate, but not having them linger beyond the point where they're useful. These are marks of a person who is flourishing. And it would be inappropriate to be happy all the time. That would be a sign that a person is not having emotions in a way that is appropriate to the context in which you're in, because we're not always in contexts that afford happiness, if you will. Particularly in the modern world today, there are so many problems and challenges and tragedies that it would be lunacy for a person to be happy all the time. But there is a real difference in not being not having emotions that linger where they're no longer useful. And it's a real, this is why contemplative practices are especially important in today's world. I mean, there's certain problems that are occurring on the planet today that are exceedingly complex, like climate change. And every person on the planet is subject to these problems, and it can often lead to a sense of hopelessness. And so I think that this is where We need these practices to give us some vision and possibility for the future and some vitality. And this goes back to an issue that I talked about earlier, where we need to both be in the streets and we need to have the capacity to be resilient. We need both in order to address the challenges that we're facing today.
سوال 13 رو بپرس. سوال 13 که 6 سبک عاطفی.
In your book, you talk about the 6 different styles of emotion in human beings. Could you, in a short version of the explanation of it, tell us about these 6 styles and what would be the function of knowing about them for people? You've said somewhere that it would be important for leaders to know these. What would they benefit from to know about them?
Yeah, these are styles of emotional responding that that emerge over the course of 3 decades of research, studying the variations in how people respond to emotionally challenging events. It would take a while to go through all 6, but I'll just give a flavor of some of them. One style I call the resilience style, and resilience is the capacity to recover quickly from adversity. And so every human being at some point in their lives is going to be subject to some adversity. Some people recover quickly, other people recover more slowly. And when you can recover more quickly, that is a sign of resilience. And the reason why it's important for people to become aware of these styles is because they're not immutable. They can actually be changed, and they can be changed through meditation practice is one way. And so it's really valuable for a person to know where they stand on these different styles, so that they can change them if they feel that it would be beneficial. The first and most important component of transformation is awareness. If we're not aware of these in the first place, then we can't change them. And so that's why the awareness of these is so important.
And why should the leaders, do you think, should know about these, leaders of the society?
Well, leaders have outsized influence on the events in their nations and in the world. I think most people on the planet today have the aspiration that world leaders be more aware, more compassionate, and take into account the well-being of others and the planet in their decision making. And so I think it is because of their outsized influence, it's really important for leaders to have awareness of their emotional styles.
سال 14 رو بپرس که آیا در بستری از تحقیقات
Are these emotional styles based on extensive scientific research? Because as you know, categorizing personalities of people and sort of making cliches of them have always been sort of criticized by psychologists, like serious criticisms that are about the Myers-Briggs test. Of course, we know that scientifically, you are much more different than the people who designed that kind of test, and you are scientists who approach these styles. The question mainly is about the evidence of the prevalence of these styles.
Yeah, well, these are 6 emotional styles that have emerged from 30 years of neuroscientific research. Most forms of classification of human personality or human psychopathology have not been based on our understanding of the brain. This is one of the few that has. We would like to believe that it has some important validity, but of course, science is a beautiful process because it's always changing based on new evidence. And so it will not disturb me to see these categories changed over time as evidence, serious evidence emerges. But I would say as far as schemes for parsing individual differences in emotional behavior in humans, this scheme is one that is based upon a more robust and diverse source of evidence than most.
به عنوان سال آخر آقای نخعی سال 16 روز
15 رو نمیخواین؟
نه چون یه جورایی جواب داد داشت که اصلا
As the last question, there are 200,000 students of psychology in Iran studying it, and psychology is actually one of the more popular fields in universities in Iran. As a very successful and impactful psychologist worldwide known, what would be your advice to these students who are starting out on the path of psychology?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I would say a few things. One is, firstly, to closely pay attention to their own experience, because that could be a great source of hypotheses. Some of the greatest scientists ever were extremely keen observers. Charles Darwin is one of them. I would say that that's one thing. The second is to take seriously the insights from your own culture about human flourishing, because Iran has such a rich tradition. I think that there are going to be some important insights that can be gleaned from the culture that can then be studied scientifically. And I think this would help the world to take the culture more seriously in ways that I think can be beneficial to promoting religious harmony across the world. I think that's important too. And the third thing that I would say is to really be persistent, because the study of psychology is not easy, and it is sometimes makes it more difficult to study ourselves, because we sometimes have intuitions that we about how things work that are very hard to put aside, and some of those intuitions may be right and some of them may be wrong, and so it makes the study of psychology especially interesting and also especially challenging.
Thank you very much, Dr. Davidson. آقای نخیر فقط در مورد عکس هم بگو که ما دیگه
Thank you. And if you could send us or have your assistant send my colleague a standing picture of yourself, because this will be the cover on the cover of the magazine. So if you could have a picture of you standing for the cover, that would be great.
Yes, I'm happy to do that. I wonder if you can send me an email just requesting that so I know exactly where to send it to. And then I will have my assistant do that. They can do that later today or tomorrow.
Yes, we will do that. Thank you.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Great.
It was a great conversation. Thank you for the insightful.
America, good night, Iran.
Thank you so much. Good night to you, and thank you for your good questions.
Thank you for the conversation.
Thank you. Thank you. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.